Let me know when to start the promo video. You can message it in the chat, Sarita.
We are live. We are Kanakji, you can go ahead.
Greetings, and the specific title for the program today is Why Saarc? Saarc meaning, of course, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. Why Saarc? Challenges and Missed Opportunities. I'm Kanak Dixit, a Sapan founding member and also your host for today's program. But firstly, thanks to Amit Vikram and the digital pitch for the promo video that we started with, which I'm sure will be seen in other aspects, in other arenas as well, for the message that it gives us. Um, Friends who are online with us right now in the Sapan event, my own journey in the area of South Asian cooperation, cohabitation, what have you, goes back about 3 decades. When I started Himal South Asian magazine, and down the line, we also worked together as a team to start Southasia Peace Action Network and Sapan, the news network that is hosting this event. I'm also excited, therefore, of the syndicated media service that has emerged out of all these initiatives. It's called the Sapan News Network. Our volunteers are posting the relevant links in chat right now. All this is to take forward the idea of South Asian regionalism, which essentially is an idea that has not yet caught on among the academics and even the activists in large parts of South Asia, because there is some kind of trigger, that moment that we have not yet reached. But there is no doubt in my personal mind, which is why I've been at it for 3 decades, that social justice and economic growth in South Asia cannot happen without some kind of South Asian regionalism, which is anchored in a peaceful resolution of conflicts and soft borders. So, with just that little bit of intro, we'll be going deep into it during the discussions on Saarc with our panelists. So, as we start the program, I will request to please mute your microphones, all of you present here, unless you are asked to speak. And please introduce yourself in the chat. Use the chat for questions or comments. Please stay on topic and, as much as possible, be respectful. Be patient with the technical difficulties that we may have. Apologies in advance if that does happen. As always, we invite your suggestions and feedback. As we start, I want to quickly introduce Sapan's 3-point founding charter for newcomers. Nearly 60 organizations and dozens of individuals in the region and the diaspora have endorsed these points. Anyone who welcomes it is welcome to sign in. In particular, let me just suggest that the charter calls on the governments and the peoples of South Asian nations to, one, institute soft borders to allow freedom of trade and travel to each other's countries. Two, ensure human rights and dignity for all citizens, including religious and ethnic minorities. And three, cooperate in all areas, particularly related to public health, culture, and legal reform, education, environment, climate crisis, and so on. It is also online in several languages, this charter, and we will proceed to try to make it available in more regional languages. May I now also introduce and move on now to introduce Dr. Serena Hussain, who will moderate the discussion on Saarc. Dr. Hussain is a sociologist and human geographer. She's associate professor at the Center for Trust, Peace and Social Relations at Coventry University in the UK. She has extensively researched socio-political issues related to Pakistan, Jammu and Kashmir, and within the South Asian diaspora. And before I take your leave and have Dr. Serena Hussain on, let me say that I will be coming on at the end of the program with some parting thoughts as well as thank yous. So off and onward to you, Dr. Serena Hussain.
Thank you so much, Kanak, and thank you, Sapan, for hosting this very important webinar and discussion. I think many of us who are here today joining are here because we have an awareness that South Asia is a particularly important geopolitical space. It's also renowned globally for its rich culture and history, and has significant economic and social and political potential. The region has demonstrated remarkable economic growth, and this sort of averages an annual growth of 6.7% between 2010 and 2018, which is twice as fast as the global average. However, persistent poverty and inequality underscore the need for comprehensive regional cooperation. And unfortunately, we all have an awareness, particularly in current times, that South Asia is perceived to be, and perhaps unfortunately, one of the most non-integrated regions in the world, despite this potential. There have been attempts, of course, to foster better regional cooperation. And as the focus of this webinar, Saarc, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, which was formed in 1985, has not necessarily fulfilled the potential that it could have. So this is the focus for the webinar today. And I'd like to start by apologizing on behalf of Mani Shankar Iyer, who was advertised to be with us, but unfortunately, due to personal circumstances, was unable to attend. He has, however, nominated a very capable replacement, and we're really honored to have Suhasini Haider with us. She's a diplomatic editor at The Hindu and writes on foreign policy, as well as hosts Worldview on YouTube. She's been a foreign affairs editor for CNN and is joining us from New Delhi. We also have Dr. Zahid Ahmed, who is honorary fellow at the Alfred Deakin Institute at the Deakin University in Australia. And he has extensively researched Saarc. So he's one of the leading experts on this topic. And finally, we have Tariq Karim, who will be joining us from Bangladesh. And he is a retired diplomat and currently the director of the Center of Bay of Bengal Studies at an independent university. He also previously served as the ambassador of Bangladesh to the United States and the High Commission of India. So before we go on to the panel discussion, I'm going to hand over to Bina Sawa, who will share a short video clip of a more extensive interview that was conducted with Mani Shankar. So in his absence, we hope that he can contribute via this video.
In fact, for all other countries of the region to have a dialogue with India and for India to talk to them, because there is no similar problem between Pakistan and Nepal, Pakistan and Bhutan, Pakistan and Sri Lanka, or even Pakistan and Bangladesh. It's India that is the problem and India that is the solution. We do have a basis in Saarc that it was possible to create a community for regional cooperation. which initially began with seven countries and then extended to Afghanistan. And if we can get Saarc working, then I think there are immense possibilities. But unfortunately, Saarc is more or less dead in the water at the moment, not because of any inherent defect in the concept, but because of domestic quarrels between India and Pakistan. So we first have to fix India-Pakistan. And once we fix India-Pakistan, the rest of it will just fall into place. So it is possible to have regional cooperation going along with the India-Pakistan dialogue. In fact, I would say it's not possible for you to have regional cooperation. You can have sub-regional cooperation, but not regional cooperation in what is geographically described as South Asia without a simultaneous India-Pakistan dialogue that has to be uninterrupted and uninterruptible for South Asian regional cooperation to also proceed in an uninterrupted and uninterruptible manner. I mean, without India, a South Asian regional cooperation idea is quite nonsensical. And with India, it makes it impossible unless and until the India-Pakistan position is resolved. And that is why, in my view, the highest priority in Indian foreign policy should be to settle matters with Pakistan. And they can only be settled by dialogue.
Thank you, Bina, for the clip. I should let everybody know that the full version of the interview is available on YouTube. I'd now like to just provide a very brief overview of the rest of the webinar. So we have 3 panelists, and each of the panelists will be speaking for approximately 7 minutes on the topic. We'll then have a dialogue between our speakers before opening up to any questions that the audience have. So I'd like to go ahead and hand over to Suhasini Haider, who's joining us from New Delhi to start. So Suhasini, please feel free to commence.
Hi, and good evening, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. Thanks for allowing me to fill in for Mr. Iyer. Those are big shoes to fill up. I think it was just serendipitous that a few days ago he attended a talk I'd given about why the future is regional and set South Asia in that context. Now, of course, that was a lecture that went on for, I think, more than 30 or 40 minutes. So I'm going to try and scrunch together the argument that I have sort of been trying to make. To begin with, as a journalist, I am privileged to say that, you know, in the last, 30 years of my career, I have been able to travel to each of the South Asian countries. So what I say in terms of what we have to learn from each other or to work together on is much about experience as it is about the theory. Now, obviously, there are reasons which, come straight to mind when people talk about South Asia, when they speak about what's also called the Indian subcontinent. And the idea that these countries have a lot in common. We have history together. Many of us were part of an undivided country. We have geography, which means that to the north, we have the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush. To the south, we have the Indian Ocean and all the waters there. We talk about a chemistry between the people. So we have history, we have geography, we have chemistry, traditions, culture, food, language, humor. But that's not what I want to really focus on. Those are all great reasons to get along. And I think that is the reason why South Asians, many of you are not actually in South Asia right now, but you do find an affinity with others from the region. You do find a way of getting into a corner with somebody who is from the region. because of all those commonalities. But there are beyond that realpolitik reasons why we have to somehow make South Asia work. And when you ask the question, why Saarc? It is because none of the other regional organizations for this area, whether we look at things like BIMSTEC or BBIN, which are essentially India-led organizations, or you look at other groupings that Pakistan, for example, is a part of, Pakistan and Afghanistan are a part of, none of them address these common set of problems. And I'm going to try and situate those in the present. To begin with, we're looking at an era of deep global recession. I think since 2009, and the banking collapse, we have seen around the world not just a downturn in the idea of how much global growth countries can bring about, but in particular over the idea that globalization is no longer the untrammeled success it once was seen as. As a result, for example, on the back of all of these, the global downturn, we've seen the impact of COVID, we've seen the impact of a major war, the Russian war in Ukraine, and it's not just been about just the diseases and the pandemic and the wars. And what that does to the economy, but also for South Asians in particular, the loss of jobs and revenues. South Asia is one of the regions of the world that brings in the most in remittances. India certainly has the highest number of remittances here. But revenue in terms of tourism, many South Asian countries are wholly dependent on tourism, and they have perhaps suffered the most. In fact, I think the figures are that between 1% and 10% drop in GDP has been seen in South Asian countries, and of course, each 1% drives millions into poverty. At the same time, we're seeing from the developed world an increase in protectionism, a closing of borders, a rupturing of supply chains, and each man for himself, in a sense, or for their region, when it comes to securing those supply chains. So that's the first reason. The second is the climate crisis. If we're looking at future challenges, we can keep talking about various challenges. Right now, there is the COP28 going on in Dubai, and whether or not they come out with real concrete solutions, the fact is, when you look around South Asia, it is one of the most climate vulnerable regions of the world. 20 of 23 major cyclonic disasters in the world in the past have occurred around the Bay of Bengal. Global warming, coastal degradation, soil salinity, floods. Every year we hear of a big natural calamity somewhere in South Asia. And that's not a coincidence. As I said, we are a climate vulnerable region and therefore required to try and find solutions in a regional format. The third is pollution, which is sort of related as well. That we now see figures saying that nearly 63 million climate migrants will be created in South Asia by 2050. These are, I think, ADB and World Bank figures. But the ADB also predicts that a decrease of 11% in South Asian GDPs by 2100. So by the end of this century, and of course, we're just at the beginning of it, we will see a decrease of about 11% if we keep the emissions at their current levels. The fourth reason I turn to is how South Asia today is, as a result of a lack of cohesion within, becoming an area of external contestation. Essentially, the US-China competition is now playing out in the regional sphere in every country, in a sense. We're seeing some are military and strategic pacts with them, some are in terms of competing projects. So whether it's Maldives, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, even Pakistan, to some extent, we do see a contestation coming in. And remember, this is an increasingly polarized world where neither side is any longer saying, yes, please take a little bit of this from us, but take a little bit of that from us. Each side is saying what is called the buffet option, not the a la carte option, which is that take everything from us or take everything from the other side. So the growing global polarization is having an impact here. So finally, I would say there is, as a result of a lot of these global phenomena, a real move towards regionalism. When you look at it in trade, and I think you mentioned how badly South Asia has fared and how much of a laggard it is when it comes to intra-regional trade of about 5%, when you look at up to 55% in most regional areas, you really look at the idea that every other part of the world is now dividing itself up into these groupings for trade, whether it's the European Union, the RCEP, Mercosur in South America, USMCA in the North, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the GCC, the EEAU. I could go on. The idea that South Asia refuses to find a way to work this is to, honestly, its own detriment. Very quickly, I'd like to talk about where the missed opportunities have been. I think one of the big missed opportunities, and Mr. Iyer said it quite well, is that between India and Pakistan, we have no talks at present. I think India has created conditions of its own where it is unwilling to speak to Pakistan, particularly given the issue of terror. Pakistan has also refused now to talk to India unless it goes back to pre-29 conditions. Both of them are, in fact, creating that situation. And I think Pakistan, in addition, has, as a result of its animosity with India, rejected being part of South Asian initiatives. So whether you see the energy grid that is now going to be powering dreams, India is putting onto one energy grid the power that comes from Nepal, the power that comes from Bhutan, the power that is distributed to Bangladesh and even Sri Lanka and India. So both as a consumer and as a producer, Pakistan and as an extension, Afghanistan stands to lose out if they don't become a part of that energy grid. Other types of regional connectivity have suffered, whether it is the BVI and the Motor Vehicles Act. We're seeing more cross-border roads, more cross-border construction, riverine channels, air routes between countries that Pakistan to India's west is at present being cut out of. Having the political part of Saarc, because obviously South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation works on a number of spheres, but essentially is getting stuck because of the political differences. I think there have been lost opportunities in not overcoming the obstacles to them. Let's remember, in its 40-year-old past, Saarc has, and many times, lagged simply because of the India-Pakistan system, where, if India is hosting or Pakistan is hosting, the other side is not so keen to make that Saarc so much of a success. But there are ways around it. In the last few years, we've had so many conferences move online, and I think it's a lost opportunity that Pakistan did not just suggest a virtual Saarc conference, hold it and let it move on to the next Saarc country, in a sense, or send non-politically contested leadership to each other's countries, whether it's the president or the vice president, to sit in on those. India has lost opportunities to put regional priorities really on the front burner, in a sense. Neighborhood first, which is something the Indian government talks about, has unfortunately not met neighborhood together. And the idea that India has, in so many different conflicts, said, diplomacy and dialogue is the way forward, including currently in the Israel-Hamas conflict, but not actually adopted that for itself when it comes to its when it ties with Pakistan, I think is another big reason that is holding them back. And the idea that India, was the host of the G20 this year, but did not bring that regional agenda into its G20 narrative, I think is another miss. Finally, I'd just like to address our future generation, and I see so many of you on my screen right now. You have to understand that time will not stand still. Your great-grandfathers, or those who came through and great-grandmothers, I should say, who came through 1947, independence and all the rest, knew what an integrated region really meant. They often thought we could go back to those days. Perhaps at the grandfather and grandmother levels, they didn't have such a positive impression of our neighbors, and as a result, did not see as many opportunities in each other's countries, but they did benefit from the family connections. And at that time, it was easier to travel between our countries. From 1985 to 2015, 2014 was the last Saarc summit, and I think by 2015, the whole process began to peter out. My generation certainly understood the concept of Saarc, of South Asia, and its importance really for us. I would say borders and minds have just been successively closing across the region. And while, as I said, journalists like me were able to travel across it, I now speak to whole swathes of the next generation that doesn't really know what exists across a land boundary or just a little way away over the ocean, although they are very well versed with, further afield, the US or Singapore or Dubai and all the rest. I think this is the biggest challenge for us, and I think this is in many senses the biggest opportunity lost. I'm going to stop right there.
Thank you so much, Suhasini, for such a comprehensive overview of key points, potential benefits of cooperation, but also challenges. I'm now going to move on to Dr. Zahid Ahmed, who, as I said earlier, is a world-renowned expert on Saarc. So we're really pleased that you were able to join us, Zahid. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Serena, and good to see everyone here. And thanks, Sapan, for taking this initiative. I think we're talking very little of Saarc these days. We need to discuss more to, put our thinking hats on and see, how this organization can be rescued. Whenever there's so much criticism of Saarc, I often, ask this question to people that, what are our alternatives in terms of bringing all the South Asian countries together? We don't have many. There is, of course, some level of sub-regional cooperation and so on. But in terms of looking at the whole region, we don't have anything that can, put us on the path of working together for all these human security challenges that we are speaking. And Suhasini talked about climate change. Of course, this is one of the biggest threats to the South Asian region, and organization like Saarc could have actually worked on that issue if we would have allowed the organization to develop more consensus and gain more resources and so on. I'll just say that, I did my PhD on Saarc now 15 years ago or so. I was at the Saarc Secretariat in Kathmandu as part of my PhD. So I'll actually share some of those insights. I'll focus mainly on 4 broader themes. I think one is, of course, the structure of the organization. Second, all the politicization that others have also talked about, how political differences are harming the organization or regional cooperation. Then on to challenges, and finally on to opportunities as well. In terms of the organization, we need to have a very realistic view of Saarc. The Saarc was never, the organization was never created to deal with these political issues or for conflict resolution and so on. It was created to address these human security challenges or human development related projects by avoiding these controversial issues. So that was the intention. One can always, criticize that wasn't a reasonable sort of judgment, considering what was happening in South Asia even back in the 1980s. So the organization basically also represents what its members wanted it to be. The members never wanted it to be a strong organization like the European Union. We keep comparing with the EU, we keep comparing with ASEAN, but that was never the intention of member states. But what has happened over the years, now 30 plus years, we have to give credit to Saarc for reaching consensus on a range of issues. You name it, and Saarc has an agenda on it, convention, or even institutions. I lived next to Saarc Human Resources Development Center in Islamabad for about 10 years or so, because my father was a director in another center next to it. And I could see so much activity going on, so many representatives coming from all the Saarc countries. It was always sort of a happening place in terms of cooperation on the issues of human resources development. But then on the other hand, Saarc has created a lot of other centers that have practically not taken off. There was Saarc Energy Center. I visited, I asked its chairman to sort of on a scale from 0 to 10 rank cooperation on the issue of energy, and he said 0. So that was the case back in 2009, and same is the case right now. But we do have initiatives like South Asian universities and so on. So it has done a lot of these things in a region which is still largely economically struggling, politically and socially as well. So we do have to give some credit to the organization. And then is the issue that why it is so much politicized regional cooperation. Of course, there are interstate issues when you have countries created on religious identity basis and so on. That has long-term impacts, and we continue to see that. And at Saarc Secretariat, I was surprised to see that it is purely MOFA dominated by ministries of foreign affairs. You can't see technical people there. I couldn't at least see in my 3 to 4 months there. So that, of course, poses a challenge because people in foreign ministries, they are trained to promote a country's national agenda. Okay, they are not trained to promote South Asia's national interests. So that, of course, creates its own challenges. And we see that, Saarc summits, by today, there should have been 38 Saarc summits. But only the organization has managed to hold only 18 Saarc summits. And so not on an annual basis, mainly because of political differences and so on. And so there are, of course, protectionism. Ms. Haider already talked about it, but again, it's also how, again, interstate conflicts play a role in it. Countries who are bigger and stronger, they punish other smaller countries by closing the borders. This has happened in the case of Pakistan and Afghanistan, India and Nepal, and so on. But now I think one important aspect which poses more challenges, maybe some opportunities, is China's Belt and Road Initiative. Geopolitical realignments are happening. Smaller South Asian countries, other than, of course, Pakistan, they are either hedging or they are trying to balance between India and China. That, of course, creates a whole lot of new challenges for South Asian regional cooperation because China is not a big fan of multilateralism. They like to deal with countries bilaterally. So that, of course, will have some challenges going forward. And also it has already shaped, or you can say reshaped, foreign policies of countries. Why Pakistan has not proposed a virtual Saarc summit is because Pakistan is now looking the other way because of Gwadar port and so on. It is more focused on Central Asia, as India is focused on neighborhood first because China has moved in. Pakistan is looking the other way because its vision towards the Indian Ocean is blocked by the two giants. So of course, the foreign policies have changed a great deal. And then is the issue of what the organization has done. It has made blunders as well, despite all the progress. One of the blunders was, of course, bringing in Afghanistan on board. The organization was already struggling. It had not reached that stage of maturity. And then they included another member, which was, struggling. There was this war on terror going on in Afghanistan. Nothing was settled, and they brought Afghanistan on board. That will continue to pose other challenges. India, of course, its policy is quite clear. It is working on it has prioritized sub-regionalism. It is also working on Saarc minus Pakistan approach. It's quite clear. So going forward, of course, dialogue is one way between India and Pakistan, but as other smaller countries have much more to lose if this doesn't move on, countries like Nepal, Maldives, even to a degree, Bhutan and even Afghanistan. Afghanistan's situation right now is not clear because no country has recognized the Taliban's government. So it will remain a challenge for Saarc. But as these smaller countries have a lot to lose, they should be the one leading from the front in this regard. I think COVID-19 or response to COVID-19 was a big opportunity. I would call it a missed opportunity as well for Saarc, although India did host this virtual or emergency sort of meeting to address the challenge jointly. It didn't go very well. I'll just quickly sum up because I'm looking at Dr. Serena, you on the screen, and I'm wondering whether I'm running out of time. So I think we have to measure Saarc's progress as per its agenda. Its agenda was never to focus on conflict resolution. As I said in the beginning, it has done remarkable things, considering its, the region's overall economic potential and political challenges and so on. You see initiatives like South Asian University, Saarc Development Fund, which has a secretariat in Bhutan. You go to Saarc Human Resources Development Center in Islamabad. You can see progress there. And of course, what are our alternatives when we think of, Saarc as a failed organization or dead organization? I think it's easier to breathe a new life into something that exists instead of setting up a new organization. And I think there is definitely hope in this regard. And in Pakistan, I think Nawaz Sharif recently talked about actually resolving India-Pakistan's differences and so on. And so it seems that there is some light at the end of the tunnel. I'll stop at this note, and I'll be happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zahid. Sorry for rushing you. We will absolutely come back to you because we know you have a wealth of knowledge on this topic. But I'm just very aware that we now have to hand over to our third panelist because he's pressed for time. So I'd like to now introduce Tariq Karim, who will be joining us from Dhaka, I believe. Over to you.
Thank you, moderator. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I thank Sapan for honoring me by inviting me to share this platform with some friends whom I recognize from the list, particularly Kanak and Suhasini. I was expecting to find Mani Shankar, but I see he's not in the list, so perhaps he may have dropped out. But I'm happy to share some of my thoughts. When I first agreed to join, I said, okay, South Asian and peace and cooperation fits right up my alley. But when I looked at the theme, the title for this, what struck me first, the three terms, imagine, and immediately what shot into my mind was John Lennon's famous lyric penned in 71, basically for the 71 Vietnam War, but it could have been equally applicable for Bangladesh. It was a moving anthem, encouraging listeners to imagine a world of peace without materialism, without borders separating nations, and without religion. That, unfortunately, is precisely what happened post-47 in the subcontinent, and nothing's been the same since then. The phrase, neighbors in peace. I've survived 80 years in this region, grown up with 2 partitions and the fearful consequences, with some very bad memories still etched indelibly in my mind. My instinctive reaction was one of incredulity. What peace? We neighbors seem to be incurably in a perpetual state of war with ourselves, within our puny microcosms, and with our neighbors who were once for long part of ourselves. Then we come to the question, the rhetorical question, why Saarc? And it begs the riposte, why not? And God knows I've been witness to it. I've been a part of the process for some time. It's been with a lot of pain and disappointments. It's not for lack of trying on the part of many, but it's, I think, a singular lack of vision and not being in touch with reality as to how to address or fix things that had been broken. You're trying to fix things, but you don't know how to fix it. And we got stuck in that. It's been mentioned by the earlier speaker, it didn't address political issues. Well, I mean, not just the Saarc Secretariat. I visited the Saarc Secretariat. I've seen the eminently brilliant document put forward by the Saarc group of eminent personalities, full of the best ideas that you can round up. I've seen reports by many groups what we need to do together. Now, if we put all that together, we should have been on our way to the moon already in terms of peace and development. Why didn't it happen? The sad fact is the politics kept tripping us up. When I was teaching class, I used to say that, look, if you're thinking of the economic engine of the state, you design a car which has all the state-of-the-art accessories that you want, everything that you want. It's a hybrid of all the best. In the end, the car will run only if two things function. One, if you're talking of the old 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, 8-cylinder cars, when you turn the ignition, the engine has to fire and start. That is the politics needed to fire everything to start. That has been missing. We built the car. We have the plans for the design for the car. We forgot to put in the ignition. And then, of course, number two, you need gas in the tank. Even if it starts, how far it will go. And we were stuck because we were not cooperating with each other, and we neglected the development of fuel or energy sources within our region, choosing to look away from each other. Without fuel, there's no industrial revolution. There's no revival. If Europe revived, they started first in cooperating on steel and coal and then atomic energy. That was what was needed by Europe to come. Now, a question has been posed, would the South Asian region benefit from establishing an economic union similar to Europe? Of course it would. But let us not forget that in Europe, former enemies came together, actually threw up their hands and said nevermore, and decided to work together. Although they have slaughtered each other by the tens of thousands in two previous world wars, and prior to that, two 7-year wars, and earlier even other wars. I still remember that in a meeting like this in Sri Lanka, we were discussing the same issue, and this is way back in 2012, I think. And finally said, if we want to emulate Europe, should we fight each other, have a world war, make South Asia the theater of contestation? Because I can guarantee if that happens, tomorrow all of us will be out, not just of jobs, but of lives. And the people will say, to hell with you, we won't fight anymore, we want to cooperate because we want to live. But that's not the way. We are supposed to be rational creatures. Why can't we arrive at that decision? I've talked many times on this and written, once the partition happened, the most egregious damage that we could do our collective psyche and separate individual psyches, we didn't just partition the land. You can partition the land. In any piece of property you buy, if you want to, you can cut off a chunk of it and give a price for it and you walk away. But we partition not just the land, we partition the ecosystem that sustains us, we partition the hydrosphere, the ecosphere. Worst of all, we partitioned our minds. And the walls that we built inside our minds are perhaps harder than the walls of the Bastille, which one could break down during the French Revolution. This is the problem. I mean, I faced that continuously when I was High Commissioner to India, and I think Suhasini will bear me out. My biggest challenge was not getting things to work together. My biggest challenge was getting bureaucrats and politicians of the two sides to break the inhibitions that they had inside their mind, which prevented them from coming across to seek solutions. The mindset. And that, unfortunately, our history, the history of this South Asia, which is the euphemism for what was once the historical civilizational Indian subcontinent. We have steeped ourselves and made ourselves hostage, penned ourselves in this mindset of this new Westphalian order that we embraced also readily. Hard borders, sovereignty, non-interference, while forgetting the history when we lived together, which runs for eons, not just centuries. We were like one huge joint family. Joint families have quarrels, yes, they have fights, they walk away, but they come back, they worry about each other, they embrace also at times. This just would not happen here. This was the new Westphalian disorder which we entered into willingly. And I hold that mainly responsible why we have not been able to move forward. Because every time we move forward, oh, it's a question of national security. Oh, these people are crossing our borders. Oh, most of the people had no concept of those borders. So, yes, we would benefit if we were to do that. When the borders were not there, at least talking of the Bengal presidency and the Bengal region, it was the richest presidency of the Indian Empire, colonial Britain. And even before the British came, it was one of the richest areas in India. Its fame was known all over. Why? Because we partitioned ourselves, we cut up the waterways, the railroads, the roads, snapped communication. You want to increase trade, but you won't give visas to the traders and the people to visit each other. How are you going to increase trade? You're talking of nonsense. But that was how we were approaching the problem. We must improve trade, we'll have SAPTA, we'll have SAFTA, we'll have this, that. Nothing worked because the politics was against it. There is another interesting question, and I must address it. Do regional initiatives like the BIMSTEC represent a shift away from Saarc? No, I think the BIMSTEC was a desperate effort to see when Saarc is not functioning, can we do something? And it was an awakening on the part of the Eastern neighbors, East South Asian neighbors, that look, the problem is between India and Pakistan. We are not involved in what India and Pakistan are doing. We want to live. We have growing populations. We have poverty well below the poverty line, large numbers of people. How do we cannot do anything unless we work together. We understand that. And so we went about trying to repair bilateral relations. We went about trying to develop regional cooperation. The BIMSTEC was an offshoot of the earlier process started at the same time when the Saarc summit in 1997 said, okay, reluctantly, because they were naysayers and Pakistan was the main opponent, then no, it will kill Saarc. Well, actually, it was supposed to help Saarc, because if one sub-region in Saarc could do something concrete on the ground, others would perhaps wake up and say, why are those people able to do this and we cannot do it? That was the idea. But even then, when the South Asian Growth Quadrangle was being formed in 97, the three smaller neighbors were completely overawed psychologically by the looming, overarching presence of India. So they needed some safety blanket, a security blanket. So they reached out to Sri Lanka and they reached out beyond Saarc to Thailand and Myanmar. And that's how BISTEC was formed. Then it became BIMSTEC. And then when Nepal and Bhutan joined, saying, what have we done? Why have you excluded us? The adding two more consonants became a challenge. So very ingeniously, we called it Bay of Bengal, multi-sectoral, technical, economical, and cooperation. Economic. Now, it was not to denigrate Saarc that it happened. The purpose was that if we can demonstrate forward movement, then perhaps India and Pakistan and those within opposing it, cooperation with each other, would say, if they can do it, why? What is it that we are missing out? And well, if they don't want to join, that's fine. We have to go on with our lives. BBIN, the revival of it in 2015 was essentially revival of the South Asian Growth Quadrangle formed in 1997, but which didn't take off. Not a single meeting happened because Foreign Ministers Committee was formed. So yes, we're still struggling for this. We're still not moving. Of course, when BBIN showed signs of moving forward, India suddenly leapfrogs and says, no, let's concentrate on BIMSTEC. Quite forgetting, and I have to say, rather with great disappointment, BIMSTEC has 5 Saarc members: Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and Bhutan, and only 2 ASEAN members. You give me a reason why any ASEAN member would take the organization or the prospects of cooperation seriously. If I were an ASEAN member, I'd say, you can't do anything on the decisions you have taken within BBIN. Why should I commit myself more to this? It's an exercise in futility. It massages our ego, but it doesn't get anything. So, these are questions we have to address. And I think fundamentally, there are reams and reams, and this conference should not be just for an hour and a half or 2 hours. It can go on forever. And yet, I tell you, we'll walk away without a solution. Because unless the politicians come together and say, no, we will address and solve it, it's not going to happen. Politicians, when the partition happened, new elites were created in the new entities, sovereign, untouchable entities, Westphalian entities that were formed. They were not going to give up that new elitism and new power that they had over the resources they control. They were not going to pool or give up their sovereignty to remerge back into the old form. I think that is one of the fundamental things, the blockages in the brains, which has held us back. There have been instances, yes, there are instances. Saarc has achieved a number of concrete things, but they don't really touch the core problems that need to be addressed. So we have cooperation in agriculture, in the sector. We have a working disaster management center, which was basically grouping together 4 other centers which were not working. So we reinvented that. Stumbling along. There's an energy center, and rightly pointed out, we have made 0 progress in energy cooperation, at least on the Western front. On the Eastern front, a lot of things are happening. On this side, in the BBIN area, things are opening up. If we become energy independent, we can transition to green energy within 10 to 12 years if we start working now on the decisions finally taken a couple of years ago. So these things are happening. Can we still imagine a South Asia at peace? I think we have to keep imagining. We have to keep imagining because this is part of the region we belong to. If we stop imagining, then we have given up and it will go into a sort of implosion or perhaps an explosion. But we have to understand something. We, I think, have to first understand what is the malaise. Now, if a person is suffering from schizophrenia, he goes to a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist tries to understand what is it that's making this person with multiple personalities fight himself, because that's what we are doing. And that is what we have to do. We have to understand that what is the thing that prevents us? How do we get over that? What are the ways that we can reassure ourselves that we are not threats to ourselves? And unless we can do that, no amount or no formulas are going to help us. I think, final words, I unfortunately, I see each divided entity created new elites within these Westphalian borders. And I see those divisions being exacerbated today by thoughtless, or sometimes perhaps not so thoughtless after all, actions, vitiating interlocutions and exchanges between leaders across borders. Unless we have the courage to look deeply within ourselves and recognize the hubris within us that drives us into such frenzied antipathy towards each other and address that hubris, I do not see any sign of redemption ahead. If we wish to change and heal our larger whole, we must each of us heal our fragmented, egotistic pieces first. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your insight. It's already generated comments. I can see that. I would just like to thank all the panelists again. we have so much experience and knowledge in this virtual room. So again, just thank you very much to the organizers for such a thought-provoking webinar so far. I'd now like to invite all of the panelists and also Kanak, if you would like to join, just to respond to each other, just to give you an opportunity to respond to each other, and perhaps just a way of initiating that. I see somebody very sort of nicely summarized, I think, all of the points that were made, or a point that was made in all of the presentations, I should say, and that is that indeed partitioning the minds is the biggest problem. So the question here is, how can we reach out to each other and rejoin and make our minds meet? So that's perhaps just something that I'm throwing out there, but please feel free to respond to each other. So I'm going to now hand the floor over to the speakers. Any comments on each other's discussions? Very welcome. And if not, I will provide another question.
I would make one point, if I may. The last, all three panels were so good, speaking to the mind, and Manishankar Iyer before that. But just to pick up one point, I'll come up with my summary later on. But what Tariq, Karim had to say about the state of the partitioning of our minds, essentially because the elites in each country, each capital, and not just Islamabad and New Delhi, there's a Westphalian elite in each country. And to keep their own privileges intact, they are one of the biggest roadblocks to South Asian amity and a revival of Saarc. I would just add one point and a question to Tariq. It seems to me that there's not enough work done in theorizing or conceptualizing South Asia. As a result, Saarc also gets the whammy in that we have one idea that it's good for the economy, it's good for our unified history in the past, which is now scattered, it's good for the mass psychology, etc. But not enough work done on the, let's call it the ontology of South Asia by scholars. Scholars, unlike Zahid here with us today, by and large, the scholars have tended to skirt Saarc and be more interested in other matters. And in doing so, they have done injustice to their own countries and to South Asia as a whole. Question to Tariq.
Okay, Kanak, thanks for that. I don't consider myself a scholar, but I have attempted to address that, the questions behind the question, the deep question which you are asking. And if you have patience, perhaps it will come out in the form of a book in the next few months. It's under publication. Okay. And I have pointed out to two fundamental malaise in the way we adopted Westphalia. Who adopted Westphalia? Let's ask that question. You mentioned about the elites, the small elites. It was the swallowing the line that adopting the institutions that Britain has and the way these work is the fast route to modernity. That was one of the things. Of course, British rule did a lot of things in generating divide and rule. They started, working on the fault lines that were latent or they were not, had been inactive for too long, to serve their own purposes. But, I would stray away from pointing fingers at the British, because the British did what they did as any colonial power did. If I had been a British person and at that age and time, I would perhaps have behaved the same way. The fault is in us that we allowed us to be manipulated in that manner. And the way they did it was, I say the leaders who led us into partition were all children and grandchildren of Macaulay. The British succeeded in creating a class of elite people, educated, handpicked across religions, across ethnic lines, across class and caste lines, took them there. They all came back saying, oh, this is the way to modernity. This is how we, but they also stirred up a lot of latent subnationalism. So the partition is not just, the partition of 47 was just the partition of Bengal and Punjab provinces. It was not the partition of India. What that triggered off was a chain reaction of partitions within India first. How many partitions? How was, the Bengal presidency, Assam was partitioned from 1 into 7 plus 1. Bihar was partitioned from 1 into 3. UP was partitioned first into 3, then to 2. Pakistan itself, partitioned itself. It triggered off a wave of partitions which was self-inflicted. And it was all done because elites were created, having got control of the resources and how to allocate them. Of course, they would allocate most of it to themselves, and they were not going to give up that power. And the more that it became a sort of viral fever spreading across. What should we have done? We adopted democracy, fine. With democracy did not work here. These were all imported institutions. The pH factor of the soil into which this new the plant from somewhere far away from here was planted, it didn't germinate the way it was supposed to. It worked in somewhat different ways. The Parliament in Westminster passed laws for the benefit of the subjects of Her Majesty. The institutions of police and administration executed orders or rules framed by the Parliament for the welfare of the citizens. The parliaments they replicated in our soil was for extraction. The administration and police they set up was to enable extraction without opposition. That mindset remained even after the British left. And so I think that's why I said perhaps adopting in toto the British practice of democracy of first past the post was a fundamental error, where winner takes all. We all have minorities. My minority is your majority, and your majority is somebody else's minority. We were all together and we managed this minority-majority thing with some hiccups every now and then, but largely living in peace. Now that we are within sovereign, inviolable borders that we can't interfere in technically, actually nothing is internal. The line between internal and external is fudged. What happens internally in India affects the population in Pakistan and in Bangladesh and elsewhere. There's always a reaction going on, even if when we are not supposed to actually react. And I think that is the problem. Perhaps we should have gone in for some form of representational democracy, where no minority feels left out. You go in and fight it out within the parliament. We have had periods like this even in the Westphalian states. Even in most recent times, in the last century, less than 30 years ago, Italy has constantly had governments forming and falling. Until you come to a stage, you have to work it out yourself. We don't need others to come and tell us how to fix our problems. Unfortunately, we do that. When people say, this is a post-colonial order, I said, no. European colonialism died in 45 because they destroyed themselves. But from the ashes of World War II arose two super neo-colonial powers. And the superpowers engaged the same tactics in dividing populations within countries and dividing countries in the region against themselves. And that goes on even today. We in Bengal should not have forgotten this, but we have forgotten June 1757. Can anyone in the audience tell me what I'm referring to? Anyone? The Battle of Plassey. The Battle of Plassey is what enabled the British to conquer the whole of India. And how did they do that? Both the French and the British were vying to buy over the Indian rulers in the different states, the power centers. The French lost out to the British magnificently. They just managed to retain to a couple of enclaves in South India. Clive bought over the commander-in-chief of the Nawab of Bengal. And when the Nawab of Bengal went to fight Clive, he found he had no army. That is what is still going on today, unfortunately, in the way we practice our politics and the way we respond to external and internal divisions. So in a sense, I don't point fingers at others. I point fingers at ourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Thank you, Kanak, for that question, and also Tariq for your response. And just as you were speaking, I had a question for Suhasini. So as Tariq said, what happens in India doesn't just impact India, but also its neighboring states. And I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, how has India's engagement with its neighboring countries evolved recently? And do you think that they're mindful of the sort of domestic policies and how they also impact sort of internationally within the region?
Yeah, it's a loaded question, and I will not shy away from it. Right now, whatever answer I give, if somebody doesn't like it, that's his problem. That's my attitude. Okay.
Suhasini, it'd be great
with India, we in Bangladesh at least came to terms with one thing. We are a small country, 1/10 the size of India in area, population, resources, everything. We are India locked. We may not love India, or we do not have to love India. We cannot change our neighbors. We have to learn how to live with our neighbors. And it's better if we learn how to live with them amicably so that both of us can move forward. Once we decided we had come to this point, we were able to build a lot of bridges which had been destroyed earlier, rebuild the bridges. So right now, in a sense, many of the disruptions that had happened in 1947 and subsequently after 65, they are on the verge of being not only restored, but on the point of being operationalized. We have more plans along the way, more ambitions. And recently, we announced the Bangladesh Delta Plan 2021. This is a very ambitious scheme. Why is it called the Delta Plan? It's an all-embracing plan because Bangladesh is a delta. How is a delta formed? It's formed by the myriad rivers that can run through it. The two major Himalayan river systems have nowhere else to flow but through Bangladesh. If the delta is tinkered with and the flow of waters is altered, the delta will die. If the delta dies, the current 170 million people, which may be 200, 250, down the line by the time the century ends, they will lose their livelihoods, their habitat, and they will become internally displaced and wandering about. There will be a problem for the own government, but it will not be an internal problem. That's something that we all have to weigh. India has taken cognizance of many things that need to be done, but India has not been able to address the one thing that we really wanted to address. We have been requesting repeatedly, let us not think of rivers in terms of sharing. Sharing means a division of the spoils. And when you have a division of the spoils, you will have quarrels. You receive more, I receive less. There will always be politics. But how did we manage these ecosystems before the partition? We managed them. We had navigation, we had agriculture, we had fisheries, we had upstream and downstream riverine industries. They flourished. That's what made Bengal prosperous. We are trying to hope to reawaken that sense of basin management. If that happens, India will also benefit and we will also benefit. And that, unless the Indian leadership comes out of this Westphalian mode on the rivers and the commons is not going to happen.
Thank you. Suhasini, it'd be great to hear your opinions on this as well.
Well, I would take a slightly different tack simply because Ambassador Karim has so beautifully already explained our present and our history. At the end of the day, it is about what we can do differently for the future. You spoke about domestic politics having an impact on how India sees its neighborhood. I think there's no question that at a time where we are seeing what are called populist governments succeed in countries across the world, in democracies across the world, those populist governments, including the one we have here in India, have many common traits. Some of it is about this hyper-nationalism. Some of it is about ensuring, that there is more protectionism in trade and that sort of thing. Some of it is about protectionism of the boundaries and of immigration restrictions. So each of these countries have actually established domestic policies that have these in common. One of the big things, therefore, in this kind of populist frame has been the domesticization of foreign policy. In other words, foreign policy is essentially something that you can sell domestically. It's the opposite, perhaps, of what was always understood to be. A couple of years ago, I was in Dhaka for a Bay of Bengal connectivity conference, and I heard from a former, I think, Serbian president who has seen his share of conflict in his region. And he said that, in the past, humans behaved like humans, but states were expected to behave like rational entities. They were expected to do what was in the long-term best interests of their countries and of the world and of the region around them as a result of that. And he said, I fear that what we're doing now is having states behave like human beings. So even though it is completely irrational, and that's the point I was trying to make, that the rational way forward is for more regional integration. Forget the ties that bind us, forget the commonalities in our culture. The rational position is that we integrate our roads, that we integrate our energy sources, that we integrate, have our riverine connections as well. And that is something that the rest of the world is finding out in its own region. So my whole point has been that if we continue down this path where it's about domestic politics, and I'll be honest, maybe I'm just saying this anecdotally, I have seen that when leadership decides to strengthen relations in India's neighborhood, there is no pushback. People are all for it. And even in the past 10 years, every time the government has tried to, do the extra gesture in terms of whether it was Prime Minister Modi's visit to Lahore, whether it was the détente with Bangladesh, the land boundary agreement being signed, which of course Ambassador Karim really faced the brunt of trying to bring all the sides together, and everyone said it was impossible to do. But the fact is, when those have been done, the current situation with Sri Lanka, previous initiatives with the Maldives or with Nepal or with Bhutan, there is no domestic pushback. So sometimes my own sense is that these are created for some kind of a political narrative, which don't actually bear out on the ground. However, my point remains that we have to see this as the rational thing to do. One of the big things I think that could change is to ask around us, how many of us make the effort to visit a neighbor? We have all grown up, and there was some conversation about how the elites in each of these countries have taken the countries in a certain way when it comes to regional integration, looking outside of the region rather than inside it. But we have to ask ourselves inside. Okay, visas are an issue with some of the countries, primarily between, say, India and Pakistan, but they're not really an issue for the others. How many of us are making the point of crossing a boundary by foot or taking a ferry in order to understand that, that the world outside is not just something you get into in a plane and then land in a different part of the world. The world outside is literally at your boundaries. And that's when you start to see the similarities and the huge potential of being able to connect to each other or not. So I do think that there's a lot to decry and to really feel bad about, and the lost opportunities of the past. But I think even today, even if now everybody of a certain generation, because as I said, a previous generation already understands this. This is intrinsic to us. We've seen it. But I'm talking really to the generation under 30 years old today. Make the point of going to a land boundary neighbor or a neighbor who's across a ferry away. Find out what is in your immediate neighborhood. And I think that narrative, that understanding is essentially what will keep the dream alive, I hope, for the next generation.
Thank you so much, Suhasini. And Dr. Zahid, a related question, really, something that's relevant to the whole region, very much related to what has just been discussed now. How do you think the region is addressing and prioritizing human security concerns? And what collaborative efforts can be made?
I somewhat talked about this in my initial input as well, but I think, I have mentioned that, COVID-19 was a big opportunity in this regard, or response to COVID-19, because Saarc does have focus on the health sector and so on. But as other speakers were addressing much deeper issues, I was thinking that then perhaps, responding to this comment, I could maybe bring in another dimension to it, which is, I think, very central to the Saarc's revival. I'm talking about the revival, who knows when that is going to happen. But if it does happen, I think what is important is to build this collective identity, something that the European Union has done very well through education, through textbooks. But unfortunately, in our case, it has not happened, because there are states that have they are still struggling in terms of building their own national identity. National identities have been constructed, reconstructed, as we continue to witness in some of the countries, and unfortunately that has not happened. And it's mixture of this struggle with populism or populist politics. We see that in-group, out-group divisions have only grown in South Asia. So if Saarc is revived, let's say, there's a big if here, I think it's important for not only Saarc as an organization, but also, all the civil society groups who are working on these issues to think about this collective South Asian identity and how that can be built through, especially, I think the role of educational institutions is important. If we are talking about under 30s in today's context, I think it's very important, because they don't have any direct experiences in this regard. I did do a research on textbooks in India and Pakistan, and how they play a very negative role in terms of actually furthering these divisions. But I think there's also an opportunity to address this challenge, because if we are divided as far as our thinking goes, and the leadership is not very helpful, I think the civil society has a very large role to play here in terms of bridging the divide.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. And I think also a really important point for scholars and academics alike, not just within sort of compulsory education, but higher education, of course, where we nurture the future thinkers within the region. Thank you so much for that, Zahid. I'm just aware of time. Firstly, I would like to thank Ambassador Tariq Karim for joining us. Unfortunately, he's had to leave already, but he was incredibly insightful. So just wanted to convey my thanks to him. I think I'm now going to hand back to Kanak for some closing remarks. So Kanak, please go ahead. I think you're on mute.
I've just lost on my screen. I had a long list of thank yous to express for all who made this very important event happen. Unfortunately, I've lost it on my screen. So unless I can get it back on, let me go straight to closing remarks. But before that, I ask whoever is following us now or later on when they call this up on Facebook or YouTube to please sign up with our charter under your name or your institution's name. Likewise, we are an organization that run on support. And so any kind of support that you are able to give will be appreciated because we are all a bunch of volunteers in Southasia Peace in Sapan. People who are driven with the idea that South Asia is required for the future of a fourth of the world's population. Let me go to my notes and just quickly run down some of the ideas that came through to me listening to Zahid and Suhasini, Manishankar Iyer, and Tariq. When Manishankar Iyer talks about the problem of South Asia and of Saarc being, with India being the problem and India being the solution. Indeed, India is at the center of South Asia, and until Afghanistan came along, India bordered all the other countries of Saarc, but none of them bordered each other. That has changed somewhat with the accession of Afghanistan into the Saarc grouping. Nevertheless, the centrality of India and the asymmetry of South Asia must give us pause and must challenge us to theorize South Asia better than we have been doing. Because even as we decry the Westphalian state, we are still talking of South Asia as synonymous with Saarc, and hence a grouping of 8 nation states, the Westphalian nation states. So there is a need to think differently about South Asia. And I'm sorry, as I said earlier, not enough scholars have gone into it. And hence, if we cannot define South Asia properly, we will never defend Saarc the way we need to. Saarc as an organization, including from what I heard from our great panelists today, is an organization that may be not dead in the water, as Manishankar Iyer mentioned, but it is moribund. And it needs a revival. It needs a redefinition. But all of that also requires first to go behind the curtain and look at South Asia and to understand what do we mean by South Asia, because there's a tendency to equalize Saarc and South Asia. South Asia is much more, vastly much more than what Saarc is. South Asia as a term includes the history of this region. It includes interconnections beyond the nation states. Saarc, as Zahid mentioned, is essentially a child of 8 foreign offices, MOFAs. As a result, it is unimaginative, but and it doesn't have a budget. It cannot bring on expertise. Yet we need a Saarc, and we need to work on Saarc. Keep in mind that the last summit, as Suhasini also mentioned, was 2014. And since then, the next summit should have been in Islamabad. Hasn't happened till now. And as we all talked about earlier, it's the problem between India and Pakistan that has manacled not just South Asia, but Saarc. And if we look for the next summit, who should be pushing it? It is the current chair of Saarc, which is Nepal, whose current prime minister is Pushpa Kamal Dahal. There is no bone in the body of our prime minister, sadly, today, that would challenge Mr. Modi enough to suggest that we have a South Asian revival and a summit of Saarc and movement towards the summit in Islamabad. So that is a problem that I see. And I will just go quickly into what Suhasini said. Fully and thoroughly agree with her when she says that the future is regional. And I must compliment Suhasini because there are very few journalists or academics in India, the nation state, that will speak as forthrightly to say that the future is regional. Because indeed it is, for the sake of social justice, for the sake of equity, for the sake of economic growth. And so there is, I feel that from all our panelists, there was no question that the future is regional, the words used by Suhasini, yet it is not happening. And the question then is, who should bell the cat? As far as Saarc is concerned, the current regime in Kathmandu is not willing to bell the cat, meaning the reluctance, much more than Pakistan for now. It used to be Pakistan that was dragged into Saarc, so to speak. But India is now fully engaged in looking other way than towards a revival of Saarc. I was in late September, I traveled across the border from India into Pakistan, arrived in Atari, crossed over to Wagah. The Wagah-Atari frontier is famous, as you know, for the beating the retreat ceremony, which is a macho and a masochistic exercise, which should be banned, frankly, for the sake to save all of South Asia from embarrassment about these two, the Rangers and the BSF forces going at each other in mock battle spirit. Shouldn't happen. But this is not what I want to share with you, and I'll be done in a minute. I went into the terminal, like an airline terminal, to go in from India into Pakistan. And on both sides, the facilities are all there. But it is the silence of practically the graveyard. What we should have in a region of a fourth of the world's population, and India with 1.4 billion and Pakistan with 270 million plus, this should be a border should be a cacophony of the bazaar of South Asia, except it's silent. There is almost nobody crossing over from one side to the other. And myself as a Nepali, with the privilege of my Nepali passport, I managed to cross over. To me, I should share with this group here, the sadness to see the emptiness of Wagah-Atari points at the sadness of South Asia and that of Saarc. And so what I would suggest is, again, realizing that as the term used by Tariq Karim, the Westphalian elite of South Asia are the ones who want to keep things as they are, who's going to break out and give a vision for the future rather than keep us in this, essentially in poverty, to speak very directly. Saarc not working, South Asia as a concept not sinking roots, means that we're into more of poverty in the era of more and more vectors like COVID, diseases and climate crisis, and migrations, which no amount of concertina wire is about to block people from crossing over. The way to go about it all is through, if I might suggest rather boringly, back to academia, courageous scholars who will write about a future of South Asia that is not, where they are not fearful that they will be challenged for their nationalism because they talk South Asia. So we need more people like the individuals in this panel, and that is how I think we should move ahead. I'm sorry, there was a list of thank you for great people who made this happen, but I have screwed it up and I don't see it on my screen. I apologize. I thank everybody. Please sign the charter if you can, and Vishal will probably do the thank yous there just now. And okay, I got it now on screen. A huge thanks to everyone who made this event possible, and to all of you watching. Besides those of you who saw on the screen today are many volunteers without whom we couldn't have done this. And special thanks to the Sapan team, which is a South Asian team, let me say. And the team is made up of Sarita Bartola, Vishal Sharma, Khushi Kabir, Shailaja Rao, Lalita Ramdas. More than the team, these are also the founders of Sapan, Khawar Mamtaz, Kavita Srivastava, Saifullah Saifi, Fauzia Diba, Namrata Sharma, Sara Arshad, Beena Sarwar, and everyone else who contributed. And special thanks to our moderator, Serena. And thank you, and look forward to seeing you next time. Remember to fill in the feedback form and contribute. And let me end by saying from the words that is more prevalent in the northern half of South Asia than the southern half of South Asia, but it is a term that will carry everywhere. South Asia Zindabad.
Great. Thank you so much, Kanak. I think we can close the live video. Great discussion.